But I had this sensation where like I could literally do anything, and that the only thing that holds us back is our own thoughts, our own anxiety, our own barriers, and that like literally we're all capable of everything.
Cannabis truly is a pharmacy in a flower.
Survival comes with cooperation.
Pleasure is healing.
You're being a warrior of the weird.
I'm Lex Pelger, Director of Education at CV Sciences, and this is the Lex Files. Michelle Janikian is a seasoned journalist who's been covering the drugs beat for years. For her first book, she wrote an excellent guide for people interested in exploring psilocybin mushrooms, also called magic mushrooms. Today, she'll share from her interviews and experience about some of the best practices for beginners looking to explore these powerful medicines. She talks about ingestion methods, mystical states, and the dangers of sexual abuse by providers. It's an important topic, and she's a grounded, well-spoken resource. If you have any family members or friends who might be thinking about trying psilocybin mushrooms, this is the podcast to send them. Or get Michelle Janikian's Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today with Michelle Janikian. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you wrote a great book. You are a very gifted journalist in a number of fields with a number of great publications. And I was wondering if you could just start by telling us about your first psilocybin mushroom experience.
Sure. Yeah. So the first time I took mushrooms, I write about it in the intro to my book, but I had no idea what I was doing. I was only 17 years old. I was in a suburban parking lot in New Jersey where I went to high school. And at first, they took a really long time to kick in. So I thought they didn't work on me. I was already kind of like an avid cannabis consumer. And I don't know, I just had this feeling like mushrooms wouldn't work on me. Like I was like stuck in this boring earthly dimension forever. And, around midnight that night, they started kicking in and I had to meet my curfew. So I left my best friend's house. And this is like the biggest mistake I made. I drove a car home, manual, like 3 miles, country roads, like not a good move. I write in the book, if you stop reading now, just please don't drive a car on psychedelics. It's my biggest piece of advice. But, so I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I ended up having a really, really powerful experience just in my childhood bedroom, totally by myself, mostly looking in the mirror, which I had no idea is like very controversial. But I was a struggling teenager, like a lot of teenagers in like 2005 or whatever it was. I, was already medicated for depression. I was struggling with an eating disorder. I had no idea like who I was, my place in this world. And it just all seemed so hard and just like terrible. And then I had, I took a full eighth of mushrooms and I had a really, really powerful experience where I felt like self-love for the first time. I realized I was a worthy person. I was a beautiful person inside and out, which was like actually a really big deal for me as someone, I guess, with some pretty intense body dysmorphia that I had no idea about at the time, to look in the mirror and see just like how beautiful and smart and just like a person I was. I was so detached from my own self. And since then, it's been a journey. But it was, even without any preparation, I had this really, really mind-opening and accepting experience that, and I had no idea about psychedelics as therapy, that was a common thing that happened. And obviously I got really into it from there, and like the rest is kind of history. But that first trip was something else.
And did it stick with you? How did it go to have that deep experience and then go about your life? How did it stick?
That's the thing, right? Because I wasn't aware of integration and all this kind of just theory around psychedelics and how to make the ideas stick. So it didn't stick as hard as maybe now when I go through an experience like that and I continue to engage it, right, with like journaling and reflection and other integration techniques. And I actually kind of kick myself that, I wasn't like journaling. Like now journaling is such a big part of my psychedelic practice. And I really wish I had like a journal entry before my teenage first mushroom journey and then like after, right? Because maybe I'd be able to see like how much I changed and how much it really worked for me. But I don't have that. And now it's all like 15 years ago and it's all very fuzzy. I can't remember if it really stuck that well. Like I think so, because I was able to move on and like do stuff with my life instead of being stuck in my depression rut. And, I did get over my eating disorder. It wasn't like, it wasn't like psilocybin for anorexia. It wasn't that like cut and dry. But I think just seeing myself from that new point of view really helped. But I wasn't really actively engaging it as like this self-care tool or something. So, it's a little tricky. It wasn't really until I got back into mushrooms in my late 20s, like 5 years ago, that, I really started practicing other things like journaling and meditation that really helped my lessons stick more. And so, even though it was recreational use when I was younger and it was really powerful and it did kind of shift my outlook on things, it's hard to tell, to be totally honest, how much it stuck and how much of an influence on everything it had, even though it clearly did, but I can't like quantify it in a way. But I wonder if that experience never happened, who would I be now?
When did you know that you wanted to be a journalist and a writer?
I wanted to be a writer forever. I was a really like I'm a bookworm. I still am. I was a pretty shy kid. I'm still a pretty shy person. So books were really like my world. I learned how to read really early, and instead of like hanging out, I like to just read all the time. And I always wanted to be a writer. I had no idea journalism would be the path for me. People, when I told them I wanted to be a writer as a kid or a teenager, adults in my life, they were like, "Oh, that's cool. That's sweet. But, you should really probably like go into marketing or something like that makes money, or like you should use your creative powers for good." But like no one even ever suggested journalism. It was funny. I don't know. Even though my dad worked in broadcasting, like at CBS on 57th Street in Manhattan, like my whole life, but he's not a journalist. He's an engineer. It was different. And, I went to Sarah Lawrence College in New York, which is a pretty famous writing liberal arts college. And I studied writing, but still like I didn't put two and two together. But eventually, I started getting writing jobs in all different little fields before I really got into journalism. I worked at CUNY John Jay in their urban anthropology department, and I started writing these essays that would like combine student essays. It was this project this professor had been doing for years, like 2 decades, of having students do like independent little anthropology projects in their neighborhoods in New York City. So it'd be like the Bushwick papers, like whatever, Williamsburg, Upper West Side, and they would interview their neighbors about like drug use in their communities to try to come up with this like anecdotal like drug use like history. And I put all these student essays together into like these generational like reports, and it was really fun. They never got published, but it was this really cool project that really kind of both opened my mind to this world of like you can be in drugs professionally and also helped me like with the self-esteem and the self-confidence to that like, oh, I'm a good enough writer to like get paid to do this. And my team was like really excited when I would like send around the new report, and like it was fun. And from there I actually became a ghostwriter because jobs in editorial are almost non-existent. I never did internships or anything like that because I had to work. I used to work for the New York City Parks Department full time as a student, as a young person, because it just wasn't an option to have like unpaid work, at some cool magazine or something. So I got a little bit of a late start, I think, compared to some in the field, who maybe went to journalism school and all these things. I just went to writing school. I was always kind of like, I don't know what I want to do. I'm still figuring it out. But anyway, eventually, so I started ghostwriting in the cannabis world. And then I realized that I could do this myself. And I started pitching high times and getting accepted. And I was already living in Mexico. And, Mexico has been in this really long process to legalize cannabis. We're actually so close, but I've been reporting on it for like 4 years. So it just feels like so exhausting. But that was like my in. I was one of the only, American journalists following this, and I was publishing about it. And I went down to Colombia and I met all these growers. You can legally grow 20 plants in Colombia and just this whole scene. And it just, became my niche. And from there, I started writing about psychedelics after about 3 years writing about cannabis. But I guess that's a really long answer to like why I wanted to be a drug journalist is also I'm really passionate about this stuff. I've always been a consumer. And yet when I was a teen, it was all like dare, drugs are bad, period. There's no intentional use or safe use, or harm reduction was not a phrase that came across my radar, as a kind of reckless teen driving cars on psilocybin. But and so I really wanted to share that information with the world. I found it so interesting. There's this whole other, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and this whole world of really cool people doing really great work. And I wanted to be a part of it. And now I can, and I can share that information as my job. And it's such an honor. And I wrote the book, and I continue to provide this kind of educational info from a journalistic perspective, and also following, policy and trying to really help destigmatize drug use of all substances, in the mainstream. It's not an easy goal. It's going to take the rest of my life, but it's an honor, and it's really the coolest job in the world.
That's great. The name of the book is Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion, and it is an excellent resource for anyone listening who is interested in trying psilocybin mushrooms or knows someone, particularly elderly people in their life who might be interested. And I highly, highly recommend it. And I'm very curious how it came about for you.
Yeah, so two parts. Mushrooms were just getting more popular, right? I signed the contract to write the book 2 years ago or something, and it was just psychedelic renaissance. It's I guess Michael Pollan's book had just come out also, which was just this pretty big cultural wake up call to psychedelics. And all of a sudden the mainstream is kind of taking this seriously for the first time. And there's all of these documentaries of, older people, in their 50s and 60s going into these clinical trials and changing their life, especially the death anxiety trials at NYU and I think UCLA. And they were getting all this press. And so there's all this interest in mushrooms. And yet the only information out there on how to do this outside of a clinical trial is kind of it's very spiritual. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but to me as someone who's not very spiritual, honestly, mushrooms are making me more spiritual, so I get it. But when I was just coming from this drug media world, I was this is all kind of lame and new agey and weird. And I think most people feel that way as well. And they don't want anything to do with this. The covers of the books are all weird. The text is all kind of hard to relate to. And I really wanted to create something that was accessible, that normal people would read and understand and still want to, experiment. And then they can form their own spirituality after. I guess I also kind of get turned off by this idea of someone else's spirituality being forced down my throat. I'm the kind of person who wants to discover everything for themselves. And whether that's, my ancestors and the spirit world and Mother Earth or whatever, and it's not that I don't really respect and am starting to believe in more woo woo or new agey or spiritual stuff, whatever you want to call it. I don't mean to insult anyone. But I just wanted to help people feel comfortable in this space and learn all the basics that you kind of learn once you start taking psychedelics, like with your friends or whatever. Like, yeah, it's better if you're in like a chill place with soft lighting and chill music and comfortable clothes and all this kind of like basic stuff you learn, right? But I wanted to provide it for people also because, my first mushroom trip was such a mess. And I had a bunch of messy ones after that too, because I didn't know all this stuff. I learned it. It took time. And I just also, if mushrooms were going to become this more popular mainstream thing, as I was watching cannabis just become more acceptable and used openly, just wanted to provide folks with all the information they would need to have a safe trip so they wouldn't be, out in public or driving cars or doing kind of silly things because you're not all in this reality, and those kinds of human things can seem kind of silly or stupid, but you could still get hurt if you like cross a busy road or things like that. So just like teaching people, what set and setting is and how to prepare a safe one. And the book is not like dogmatic at all. It's not like step 1, do this, step 2, do that. I just give people real world examples. I interviewed a ton of people for the book and just like wrote about what real mushroom users do. And so as a reader, folks can just like pick and choose what feels right to them, try different stuff, experiment. This time I'm going to do it in the woods. This time I'm going to do it in my bedroom with eye shades. Like it's totally up to you, and it's going to evolve over time. And I just wanted to give people that resource all in one place.
That's great. And I think you certainly succeeded. And I wanted to get in some of the meat of potatoes and get your personal perspective on some of these big questions that you raised. And one of the important ones in the beginning for beginners is ingestion methods. And I was wondering if you have any favorite ingestion methods for first timers.
Ooh, for first timers. I think that you should probably just eat your mushrooms for the first time. And I know people aren't going to want to hear that because they taste kind of gross. But actually, so when I was sitting in that parking lot stuffing mushrooms in my face for the very first time when I was a teenager, and everyone had warned me how gross they're like, Michelle, these grow on shit. Literally, they taste disgusting. And I was eating them like, actually, this is great. What is everyone talking about? I guess I was like a mushroom person from the start. Like, this isn't so bad. So I have this opinion for a few reasons. Not so much about the taste. The taste is a little gross. It might make you gag, but it's kind of like you got to get over it. Like you got to learn to just accept it, I think, in a way, and that will help your journey. But also, all the other ingestion methods that I personally like now as a more experienced user, like teas or lemon teching, they do change the experience slightly. Like making a tea or lemon teching, which I can explain the techniques after, they can change like the rate of absorption. And so you start to feel it faster, especially lemon teching, but tea as well. And so when I talk to users about like regular mushroom people about this, they're just like, it's almost like eating your dried mushrooms or fresh ones. It's like an extended release. Like if you compare it to like Adderall or something we're all kind of familiar with. Eating dried mushrooms is more of an extended release, and it's good for beginners because, the come up is slower. You have more time to get used to the experience. The come up is the hardest part. You're straddling both worlds in a way, and it's hard. And I think we all resist whether we know it or not, no matter all our experience. The come up is still always the hardest part. But it's like, it's almost important to like ride the full wave to get to learn like what mushrooms are all about. And it's a longer experience slightly than if you cook your mushrooms or these other kinds of techniques. But I think, again, it's like important to learn to use the mushrooms and to know, to navigate their weird space that they bring you to. So for first timers, yeah. And I have a whole like chapter on different doses. I really recommend folks start pretty low and go slow in subsequent trips. Like don't like take a gram and then a few hours later, take more. I mean, like you could do, but I'm really all about like you take your low dose and then like 3 months later, maybe take a higher dose. Like this is not, there's no rush. This is like a process. And I think for me anyway, that's what's worked the best. But yeah, there are other techniques for more advanced mushroom people. So the thing I was just talking about, lemon teching, is this idea. This is my new favorite method. I mean, it's not a new thing, but I'm just really into it lately. You grind up your mushrooms into a powder, any dose you like, and you essentially cook them with lime or lemon juice, just like you cook a ceviche or an aguachile in citric acid. And then you let it sit for like 10, 20 minutes, and then you consume it. And this does a couple things. Like, it can reduce nausea, because one of the main reasons folks get nauseous from mushrooms is their cell walls are made of chitin instead of cellulose, like most vegetables. Well, mushrooms aren't a vegetable, right? But that's harder to digest. And so there's really no other cases in cuisine where we eat raw mushrooms. They're not good for you. They give you a stomach ache. Like, there's a reason we cook them. And so with psilocybin mushrooms, cooking them in citric acid, it reduces the body load a little. But what it also does is it strengthens the experience and it shortens the come up. And so it is more of an advanced technique. I wouldn't recommend it to a first timer, honestly. A lot of people tell me they did it for their first time not knowing, because their friend just like prepared it for them, and then they read my thing about it. I have an article about lemon teching in Double Blind, and they were like, oh, I had no idea like that was strengthening everything. I thought I just like can't handle my mushrooms. I was like, oh my God, no, you have to like just try again or like lower your dose. Don't lemon tegger. Anyway, but for me, as someone that, I was on like medication for depression for like a decade, and I think that kind of like affected my serotonin receptors. And so I need like a higher dose than other folks that I'm with to really feel it. I only weigh like 110 pounds, but like I'll be with someone that's like 150 pounds and they are tripping hard from the same dose I am, and I'm not. And so, but lemon teching really helps to get me there. It makes it, I don't know, it packs a little bit more of a punch. And the shortening of the come up is also kind of nice, because the come up is the nastiest part, and I can kind of like reach this plateau of the mushroom space a little faster, which is for me pleasant and more than pleasant. Like, I like that plateau that I reach after an hour or two on mushrooms, because I can do the most work in that space. That's where I have the most realizations, and it's the less negative. Like, it's the least negative. Like, on the come up, I get a lot of anxiety and a lot of negative thoughts. But once I plateau, then I have this more spacious quality, and I can start to have insights without the fear. And I don't know if it's like that for everyone, but I've just been trying to talk about my own experiences more, because people want to know, I suppose, and to try to just like be more open about all kinds of drug use, because these kinds of conversations just don't really exist that much. And I think it helps people feel more comfortable to hear other people talk about this stuff in just like a normal way.
Yeah, to normalize it when it's happening in so many ways. In the West and Indigenous ceremonies, it's such a widespread array of people approaching these things. All of us mammals share an endocannabinoid system. That's why you hear so many stories of people using CBD-rich hemp extracts for their pets. It works for dogs, it works for cats, it works for all of us. For the Plus CBD line of pet products, we only made a few tweaks between what we give to us humans and what we give to our animal friends. It's still full-spectrum hemp extract with all of the rich fatty acids, terpenes, and minor cannabinoids that help the CBD to work better. It's still made with the highest quality to produce the most reliable hemp extracts on Earth. The only difference is that we adjusted the flavor palette to make it easier to give to your dog or to your cat. With flavors like chicken, beef, peanut butter, and salmon, it's easy to drop it into their food and allow them to enjoy the healthful benefits of CBD. Try Plus CBD's pet products today by using the coupon code Lex Files at pluscbd.com for 25% off. Give your pets the gift of health. That's Lex Files at pluscbd.com. And that was something I wanted to ask you about. People talk about the importance of set and setting a lot. For you, what would be the pros and cons of the three main settings that you hear about of doing mushrooms on your own, of doing mushrooms with one friend sitting for you who's probably sober, and doing them in a group of people.
Yeah. And even within those, I would say there's so many other like options, right? Are you in a group of friends, or are you in like a pretty strict ceremonial group where you're supposed to like sit in a circle and not really get up too much? And, all these different situations, I think they're all really interesting and they all have their own value. And I think that, even if you're a person who prefers mushrooms on your own, that's me, right? But I also know that there's so much value in taking mushrooms in a group, especially a group ceremony, actually, because a small group, I'm not a big group person, but like I've done a couple mushroom retreats and I was so scared and anxious going in. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do mushrooms with strangers. What am I doing? What is this? But actually, oh, it's so powerful, watching other people go through their shit and then integrating together in a group and just being so open. And there's not a lot of opportunities in life where you can just be like that. And to realize, like, I did this thing as someone who's had depression where I would like enter a room and just be like, oh fuck, I'm the most fucked up person here, like all the time. And just like why did I do that? Like I don't know. I stopped a little. But going to a retreat as a guest, I realized that's so not true. We all think that anyway. Like we all enter rooms thinking we're the most fucked up person here, or at least like a lot of people. And that doesn't serve me, even if it's true. Like I don't actually think it is anymore. But like that was just holding me back. That comparing myself to other people in that way all the time was holding me back and just making me miserable and like on mushrooms in a big group, I was able to kind of let that go a little bit. Like not totally, but I was able to see it and I can be more now in my everyday life. I can catch myself when I'm doing it. I'm like, oh, that's not healthy. Like stop doing that. It's silly. Like you aren't that person. So what's the point in comparing yourself to them? But also like solo journey work, I actually love as well. I think I can go deeper and really let go in a different way than when I'm around people. Even like me and my partner will take mushrooms sometimes, moderate doses in the house late at night or out camping or something. And we have really great experiences. But when I take them completely alone, I can just like, in a way, I still am trying to like keep my partner safe and like not go too off the deep end or not cry too hard or loud or something because I don't want him to worry when we take them together. And when I'm alone, I can just go for it. I can kind of like scream and cry and talk to myself and talk in the mirror and just all this kind of weird shit that you don't want to do in front of other people because it's kind of odd, but it really is helpful for me. And I can just like really connect with myself and um I don't know, be honest with myself and see things that don't really work for me and sometimes kind of like metaphorical ways and it's really powerful and I don't do it that often, like maybe a couple of times a year. I'm like kind of learning what I really like. I recently rented this really beautiful like condo at the beach here in Oaxaca and it had like a private infinity pool and I lemon teched 5 grams by myself and it was the most powerful fucking thing I've done in a while. I don't know if I should even talk about this publicly, but like screw it. Like it was so good for me. I saw my place in the community, in the world so clearly. It was actually I kind of want to talk about it because it's kind of full circle from that first trip I started this podcast about because it was probably the highest dose I had done by myself since then. And it was also the most powerfully self-affirming experience I'd had since then. And it was like 15 years later and I had done all this, accomplished all this stuff since then. And I want to like cry thinking about it. It was amazing. That was my ceremony, but that's just me. Like you don't listen, if you're listening, like that's not necessarily going to work for you. Right. But I think folks just need to listen to themselves and see what sounds right. I'm not the kind of person that's worked on one-on-one with a guide or a sober trip sitter. I don't know why. The idea kind of freaks me out, but I know a lot of people are really into it and they really feel like held and supported in a way that they just never do in everyday life when they have that support. And so I don't think that it's like, I think it's really valuable. It's just not my jam right now. Maybe I'll find someone that I really feel safe with and it'll help me in another time in my life. So I guess the point is that there's all these different ways to take mushrooms, different sets and settings, and there's no like right or wrong. I think as long as you're safe and comfortable and you're doing what feels right, listen to your gut. It's only going to get louder when you're on mushrooms.
Yep, you're listening to your gut quite literally. Oh, those are a great set of lessons, and thank you for sharing about your big heroic dose, as it's called. That is really beautiful. One of the other things you write about in the book, and you're in Mexico now, is a lot about indigenous use and what's been done so far from all these people groups have been using these spiritual technologies for millennia and have all of these practices in place in different tribes with very, very different ways of doing things. Are there some lessons that stand out to you that might help us listening that we've learned from indigenous groups about how to approach these psilocybin mushrooms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, I have a whole chapter in my book, like pretty early on, about ceremonial indigenous use and just like why that's important as Westerners to learn about. I think that there's a confusion that we like should do exactly like what the Mazatec is an indigenous group in Oaxaca, like what they do. And I don't think that's exactly true. I think we should learn from them because they honor the mushroom so highly. And I think that is the most important lesson to take home, that this is not something to take super lightly, right? This is like really advanced technology in a way, or this is like they realize that this is a really powerful and deep experience. And so they have lots of traditions to prepare. Sadly, some of these traditions are not so heavily, like they're fading out in a way. And so I also like to just write about them and talk about them to try to keep them alive in a way. But for instance, so I spoke with a man from the Mazatec community who's an archivist and a professor, Inti Garcia Flores. He's really sweet and really has taught me so much. And so he told me, like, for instance, in the Mazatec tradition, mushrooms are eaten fresh and they're picked just in the area because they grow in that area. It's really, really beautiful. But back in the day, I want to say, I don't think it's as important right now, as when someone would go pick the mushrooms, like the curandera would usually bring a child because the child had a purer energy and could pick them without like putting their own energy into the mushroom. And then they would cover them in big leaves, which are like tamale leaves, which, we still use to make tamales. And so that no one would like look at the mushrooms, because just if you like look at them, your energy like could be absorbed by them. And then that would be, given to the person who takes them in ceremony. And they would even walk like the long way back home, like not through town, to avoid coming into contact with people. Coming into contact with like a funeral procession was like a really big deal, and that could like ruin the whole mushrooms in a way, or just change their energy. And I think it's really fascinating because the mushrooms do have an energy, like, and you're in your set and setting and how that's amplified on mushrooms. It's a very similar idea, right? Like, there's so many different traditions, and they all really highlight just the power of the mushrooms and how we have to respect them. Also in the tradition, like, they're taken in ceremony, and then it's recommended to not really leave the house or travel for a week. So you have time to really integrate and process your lesson. And I think that's an important one. That's an important one that's often forgotten. And even in like people who travel to Huautla to do ceremony and then they leave right away, like, you really need the time to let it soak in and to just rest and so I recommend like the Western version in my book, like take the day off, the next day off. But like, I think it's so much more than that. Like, actually, I'm one of these people now. I can't just like trip on a Saturday, rest on Sunday, and go back to work on Monday. It's just like too much. I need like way more space. I'm trying to like, it's hard to make in your life when you, need money to survive and everything. But I really think there's something to that. Making a lot of space before and after to really, let those lessons sink in and to also find the lessons. Sometimes they're not as clear. But there's so many, the chapter of my book just touches on some of these traditions. There's, a wealth of information out there that folks can look into, and I really recommend it. And all different, like mushrooms are one, but, peyote, ayahuasca, these other traditional plant medicines, there's really beautiful ceremony and tradition behind them that we can learn from. We don't have to like take it all. Obviously, that's cultural appropriation, but like we can learn from it. And I think that's really important.
Great. Thank you. I think it's a great point too about learning from, but adapting. I remember hearing a shaman lecture in New York, and that was his whole point. It's like, no, you're in a different world here. You're in New York City. You're not in the Amazon. Like, take these lessons, but we have to do it differently. And it's interesting because here in the West, we have scientists who are studying mystical experiences, and there are scales of mystical experience. So now your mystical experience can be measured from 1 to 9, I think are the numbers. How high do you hit? But it's a tricky problem. What is a mystical experience? And I was going to ask you, how do you define these mystical experiences, and why do they change people?
That's a really good question. So I define it a little in the book, basically how Bill Richards, who's a researcher at Johns Hopkins and who was a researcher back in the 70s before research got shut down, he worked with Walter Pahnke, who invented this mystical experience scale, which is the funniest thing in the world, I know. I think I have had a couple mystical experiences on mushrooms, but one of the trickiest parts is they're so hard to explain. One of the mystical experiences I've had on mushrooms in a group ceremony was this feeling in my gut. Well, actually, I felt like I had like a white light coming out of my body, but I didn't like see it. It was more just like a sensation. And the white light is like a thing. I've been reading more about it in like not just psychedelic literature, but spiritual literature as well. But I had this sensation where like I could literally do anything. And that like everyone can. It's not just me. And that the only thing that holds us back is our own thoughts, our own anxiety, our own barriers, and that like literally we're all capable of everything. And it was really powerful, and it's really hard to integrate. And but it's stayed with me, and it helps when I'm feeling really down and a lot of dread and overwhelmed and like, what am I doing? Like, to remember that space and that I felt that so real, like it was such a reality and it was such a universal truth. It still helps. It doesn't make anything easier. I don't think I can actually do anything. Like maybe if I had like started earlier, or like it's hard to explain. Like I know, like I'm not delusional where I think like, oh, I'm just like a doctor now and I'm going to prescribe medicine or something. Like I know that there's like steps for things that you have to follow. But for me, I was holding myself back a lot. Like I can struggle with social anxiety, and as a reporter, it's like not helpful. When I'm like nervous to call someone and I need answers, right? It's like, that's not, that doesn't work. And so I can remember that experience, and it gives me strength in a way. And that's just my mystical experience. People have, this sense of like unity, and there's like many kinds of different mystical experiences, and I think they are really helpful for folks to just get out of their head, get out of their ruts, get out of their normal way of thinking about themselves, because often it's a little delusional. We just like think really bad things about ourselves. I don't know why we do that, but like humans are like pretty like programmed to do that. I guess it's like a safety mechanism in a way to like keep us alive. And so we can't totally get rid of it. But yeah, mystical mushroom experiences, they get you out of that, and they can show you another place and more possibilities. And it can just be so helpful, not just if you struggle with depression or anxiety, but I think if you're stuck, if you just feel stuck, and it can just open you up to new possibilities. And it's really important. But I also think that the mystical experience place is kind of a hard one to get to. And some people get it on their first trip if they feel really supported and they take a pretty high dose. But I say, don't be discouraged if it hasn't happened to you yet, or if you took a really high dose and it didn't, or you keep having bad trips, or like it's a process. Like it takes practice. Like tripping is a skill that I think we don't talk about that a lot. And the first few times you do it, it's scary and overwhelming and confusing, and you're probably not going to get to that mystical place. But as you work up your dose and your navigation skills, like learning how to ground yourself and relax and breathe and not get too freaked out, and you just get used to the psychedelic space, I think then as you work up, I think it also has to do with higher doses, but as you work up to a safe dose range and you are very comfortable in your surroundings and your own mind, then it becomes more possible. And yeah, I think it's something that folks should just like work towards and not expect, basically.
That's a great idea. Tripping as a skill. It's really worth remembering about how much preparation it takes to figure it out and getting used to this space. And one of the things that you do so good in the book is sharing important harm reduction techniques. And I was wondering if you have any favorites that seem to really resonate with people about harm reduction techniques around using psilocybin mushrooms.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, the biggest like harm reduction techniques are kind of like a culmination of everything that's in the book. Like start at a really low dose, maybe even a microdose. Start to get used to how this feels in your mind and body. I also think that for your first time, maybe not being totally alone, even though I'm talking about this like powerful solo trip, this is after like 15 years of experience, right? So like have a loved one, someone that you can really trust and be yourself around. Being there, I think, is important. So if it does get scary or hard, you have someone that you're really comfortable with that you can just like cry in front of or hold their hand, or maybe that's a facilitator or a trip sitter of some kind. But I personally would, and you have to feel really comfortable with them, I guess, is my main point. And so maybe like your partner or your brother or your best friend or your mother could be a better trip sitter. It really depends on the relationship you have with that person. What else? I think for me, this is like, not everyone agrees with this, but I think you should be in a really I think you might want to stay home for your first mushroom trip. You need to be in a really safe, comfortable place. There's a lot of talk about like going camping and in the woods. And, it is really powerful to do mushrooms outside. But again, I think you should get used to how it feels in your mind and body. And you should do that in a place that feels really comfortable. So for most folks, that's their home. Not for everyone though. And I understand that. And if your home is not a safe place, like, finding somewhere else is important. But I think you want to, and you just need to be really easy with yourself. You want to be somewhere that's really safe and that you don't have to go anywhere for like a day. I don't, it's not like 8 hours and the trip is totally over and you can like, get in your car and drive back home or like whatever. Like, no, you're in a really sensitive place, even if you're not still actively seeing visuals or something. Like, you need to really be gentle with yourself and rest and be just somewhere, I keep saying, really safe. What else? Yeah, having a facilitator, taking a low dose, and being in a comfortable environment. Preparing your mind also. It's a hard one though, but not just taking some time to relax first, to clear your thoughts, not going in when you're really stressed or really depressed. It's a tricky one too. A lot of people find depression relief, but if you're going through like a really emotionally hard time, it could just amplify that and be really intense. So, or just, I guess what I'm trying to say is you got to be open to whatever comes. I don't know if it's exactly harm reduction, but in order to just kind of manage and navigate the space, like you can't just decide you hate it halfway through and just hope it's over, because that's just going to spiral out into a really bad trip. But even like if you just accept what's happening, even if you don't like it, you're nauseous, like this isn't what I thought it would be, like I don't feel mystical, I can't do anything, like what the hell was Michelle talking about? Like just go with it. Don't fight it. Even if it is challenging, just be open to it. And I think that is going to make it a little easier to manage. It's a hard thing to tell people when they have never experienced it, but I think it's when you decide you really hate it and then you like go to like, I want to get out of here. Like that's when stuff can get dangerous. So just make sure you just like stay in one place, just be relaxed and just go with it. And then it'll be over. And know that after like 8 hours max, it's going to be over. You'll wake up the next day and it's over, and you can do whatever you want with that experience. It's totally up to you.
And you mentioned a bad trip. And one thing you talk about in the book a good bit, what's the difference between a bad trip and a hard trip?
Yeah. So I think a hard trip is challenging material comes up. Things bubble up from your past, or you just come face to face with your biases, or some truth that you really held deeply gets turned on its head, and that's scary. And you're like, oh shit. Right. And that can be really like destabilizing in a way. And you can cry a lot. Like you can see, like I've often like seen, I write about it a little, but like how demanding I can be with my partner. Like, oh, I'm the most important person in the world. You have to do everything for me. And it made me feel horrible when I saw it on mushrooms. I was like, God damn it, you're a disgusting person. Like you can't treat people like that. But it wasn't a bad trip because I was like, oh my God, okay, I'm going to learn from this. Like I'm accepting this. Like, shit, I got to do better, and I can do better. And it gave me like hope and strength and made me, not feel good, but feel like, positive in this way where it's like, well, I can do better and I want to and I will. But I think the difference with a bad trip is that maybe you're unprepared, or maybe and so then you just like go into this stressy situation. Like maybe you're at a party and you eat a bunch of mushrooms and then you're like, oh no, like I don't want to be around all these people and all this alcohol, and like I feel terrible, like get me out of here. Like, so an unprepared trip can be a bad trip. You could be unprepared in your mind. Like if you don't know that you should accept what comes and you fight it. And like I was saying, if you just decide halfway through, you're like, I hate this, I want this to be over. Like that's kind of a bad trip. And then you get stuck in this like negative thought loop or this spiraling out place where you just have a lot of anxiety, instead of just kind of maybe taking a minute to center yourself and remember that like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to accept like anything that comes, even if it's bad, and just like show it curiosity and compassion instead of like shame or guilt. It's a really tricky thing. It's one of these like navigation skills that I think you learn over time. But if you prepare yourself and like remember to be open, then you're maybe a little less likely to have a bad trip. It can still be challenging. I still have challenging trips. I still have stuff to work out, right? Like I'm never going to stop having challenging trips. I don't think. It's just like life, but I'm human. But I really value the lessons I get in my challenging trips, and I try to change things and apply them. And I think that's the difference. It's all about your mindset. It's not just in psychedelics. We talk about it a lot in psychedelia, but it's your whole life. I mean, it's all about your mindset. How do you approach things? Are your expectations always going to be not met? Then you're always going to be upset. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to like tell people that. I'm like, well, just keep your expectations low. You'll be fine. But like, it's not that easy. I realize. But it's a life skill, really.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story my grandfather used to tell about an old man sitting by the side of the road, and a young man comes by and says, what's that town like up ahead? And the old man says, well, what was the town like where you came from? Oh, it was a horrible town. I hated it. Everyone was terrible and backstabbing, and I just couldn't wait to get out. And the old man said, I'm sorry, but that's exactly what the town is like up ahead. And the guy shakes his head and walks off. And the next kid comes along and he says, Father, what's the town like up there? He says, well, what was the town like where you came from? Oh, it was great. Beautiful people and lots of good relationships and taking time to be with each other. I had to go for work, but I loved it. And the old man said, you're in luck. That's exactly what the town up ahead is like.
I love
And
that. Grandfather's a
it's
wise
true.
man.
Yeah, I think it was him. I mostly attribute everything to Pap these days. Any wisdom that comes along.
I love that.
Thank you for that. That, I mean, it is. The mindset is for so many parts of our life. It's not just the tripping part. One of the last things I wanted to end on is something that you're very public about, which is a really important issue. You talk a lot about sexual abuse in the underground psychedelic world. And the first thing I was curious, do you ever get pushback with being so public about this? Do people not like hearing it?
They don't tell me directly, but probably. But no, I don't actually receive a lot of pushback. I actually like push back on myself for not talking about it enough. I'm like, oh shit, this is serious. We're not talking about this enough. Like, this is a real problem. It's disturbing. So no, not that I know of.
Good. And so, what are the most important things that we can do to change that?
That is such a big question that I'm grappling with right now. I think there's a real lack of accountability in this space, and that's like the biggest problem. So it's almost like, is it even up to us? Like, we need some kind of accountability team or something. And maybe one will be created soon. I don't know. I'm trying. But I think I think you got to be really careful about who you go into the psychedelic space with, like who your guide is. And not that I want to blame the survivor, right? But I guess one way to prevent the situation from happening is to, go into to really vet your psychedelic guide intensely and to not take the first opportunity you get because you're desperate to do a guided psychedelic session. And this is the first person, that finally said yes and you can finally afford. And then you go into it and then it ends up being like a pretty dangerous and sketchy situation. So I really worry about people going in, and there's so many more guides nowadays and there's so little accountability and training, and so I don't even know what to say. I really feel overwhelmed by this problem lately. It's disturbing, but I guess maybe, I mean, I know guides are like really important to a lot of people, but maybe, don't go into a guided situation. Like, that's the only good answer I have lately, because there's nothing, there's no accountability. There's no, what can you do? And then you're all doing something illegal. You can't go to the police. Like, it's really scary. So I don't know, maybe start working in low doses on your own. Maybe have your partner, your best friend read my chapter on trip sitting and have them hold space for you until you find the guide that you can really trust. I'd say also, like, really vet this guide by like talking to past clients of theirs, like get references. You don't go into someone that you don't have like a personal word of mouth, like references from other people that they're safe. But honestly, even some of like the most popular guides that are public have nasty histories. So I'm really struggling with this issue. And if you're out there and you want to help, like, reach out, because I think we need to start some kind of accountability program or group that even overlooks like the underground community. And if that's something you're interested in helping create, like, reach out to me, because I am too, and we're trying in the background here. And I don't know what to do. Yeah.
One hopes that the Me Too movement is going to help change things as there's more openness. But it's been such a problem in the yoga community and the guru community for decades. And it's men having power, so much power flowing through them, but not necessarily that being connected to morality. And these psychedelics are such easily accessible power. If you're a guru, you are connected to something that took a lot of work to get there usually. But the psychedelics, you don't have to be that connected. You just have to be able to grow some magic mushrooms. And that's one of the scariest parts about this blossoming underground. As much as I think decriminalization is a really good way, it also means that there's not enough accountability. And the same lessons that apply to the world of sex work, where the lack of legality is making problems for everybody. It seems like we're in the same situation here with the underground psychedelics.
Also, like, legalizing psychedelics and regulating them would be an answer, like one that we can start fighting towards. I know that like that also involves like capitalist interests, which a lot of people are not into and why they prefer decriminalization. But I do honestly believe we can regulate this stuff and the therapy, like that will be safer for people. It's a long road to go down, but I think it might be necessary.
Yeah, it's a long road, and I'm glad I'm not in charge of regulating this stuff. I wouldn't want to be making those calls.
It's so tough.
So the last question I think is appropriate for ending our ceremony here together is advice for integration and aftercare after somebody's early experience with psilocybin mushrooms.
Yeah. Well, there's so many different integration techniques. And so I recommend folks like, read about it and see what makes the most sense to them. For me, I'm really into journaling, like I mentioned earlier, journaling before the trip, having it around after or during in case I have some notes, but I don't try to like pressure myself to take too many notes because then I just get like stuck in this weird head place. I can kind of hold myself back a little in a way. But then right after, like that night, if I'm still awake and have energy when I'm like eating something or the next day and to continue in those few days after, because that's like a very kind of flexible and sensitive time where a lot of stuff comes to me. But like, oh gosh, there's so many, like, I'm learning how to meditate. And that really helps both like how to navigate the space and how to, kind of like distance myself from all the negative thoughts that can be overwhelming and to see things more clearly. A lot of folks, lots of different spiritual practices work, like yoga and like Tai Chi, like any of these kinds of movement practices. Going out in nature is a big one for me, connecting with nature, taking my shoes off in the woods and just kind of like reflecting. For me, like just actively engaging my experiences, not like just throwing them under the rug as some like weird thing that happened at a party, but like thinking about them through journaling, through when I'm on my hikes in the woods with my dogs, just anytime, engaging them in a healthy way, through art and writing and other things, music, listening to the music from my journeys can be really powerful. A lot of folks really, and having community, being able to talk about this stuff with my loved ones and my psychedelic community. I think a lot of folks who don't have that, like a great option is joining an integration circle. There's a ton that are virtual now. So you can anyone can join. You don't have to live in a big city anymore. You can join these virtual integration circles, and listening to other people's experiences is almost as important as sharing your own, because when you hear someone else who went through something similar or something really challenging, you just realize all these other things about your own experience and the human experience, and it's really helpful. The more isolated I am, the more depressed I get. It's when I'm in community, I really see my worth, through other people, and it's so weird how that works, but it's important. There's coaches, there's therapy, there's all sorts of different stuff. I think for some folks, that's going to be really helpful. It really is just listening to yourself and what you think you need. I have a whole chapter on it in the book if you want to read more, but yeah, listening to your gut and then making the time for it. I know it's hard. We all work so much, family, we're all really busy, but setting aside time for integration.
It sounds like one of the key words is respect.
Ooh, yeah, I love that.
Well, Michelle, thanks so much for taking the time to share with us today. I think it's going to be really helpful for a lot of people, and I really enjoyed it myself. So for everyone listening, the book is Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion. There will be a link in the episode notes, and I encourage you to read it yourself or to share it to someone you know who might be interested in learning about what psilocybin mushrooms can do for them. Michelle, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great, Lex. I really appreciate it. Woo!
Thanks for tuning in. To listen to other episodes, check out pluscbdoil.com, listen on all the podcast platforms, or see us on YouTube. Subscribe to the CV Sciences YouTube channel to see each new episode. And if you'd like to buy any of our fine products, use the coupon code Lex Files for 25% off. If you have any questions, compliments, or suggestions, feel free to write me at research@cvsciences.com, and please follow the podcast on Twitter @The Lex Files Show, where I try to keep it fun. If you enjoyed this program, please give us a like on your favorite platform or share a link to your social media. It means a lot to us. The Lex Files is produced by Matt Payne. The YouTube videos are by Brendan Cleek. Thank you to Tina Molnar and Jasmine Morris for the visuals, and the music is by Jake Bradford Sharp. Our sponsor is CV Sciences, makers of America's favorite CBD oil. And I'm Lex Pelger, signing off.